Hey everyone, welcome to Nerding.io. I'm JD. Today we're going to be looking at LangChain and specifically continuing our journey into the LangSmith cookbook. A lot of different things have been coming out, so we're going to kind of tiptoe our way into it. But first, if you have any AI development needs, you can look at our business side, Ever Efficient AI. Again, thanks for the continued support. But let's go ahead and dive in because there's a handful of cool things that are coming out. So we have been predominantly looking at our tracing examples, which we're going to go through today. And then we've been looking at our testing examples. They've also added things on fine-tuning. And even in the feedback examples, they have Next.js. This is really exciting because we use Next.js as well. We'll start going through some JavaScript examples in LangChain in another video. But what really blew me away is inside the tracing examples, they actually have a REST-based example. And that is really awesome. So this is what we're going to go through today. And the reason this is so awesome is because although LLMs are specifically written in Python mostly and also JavaScript, there's other use cases that you can use to actually log the runs and take advantage of LangSmith. So if you're using it in different languages or different types of like traces in OpenTelemetry. So this is really awesome. So what we're going to do is we have our Python notebook running in the background. You want to make sure that you have this cloned. If you haven't set up LangChain or LangSmith before, you can look at some of our previous videos, but we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So what we did is we pulled this down. We have our Jupyter notebook running, and we've gone ahead and launched our REST API example. So what this is telling us is that we can actually submit post requests, and it will to the API LangSmith LangChain runs, and use our XAPI header which is our API key. You can see down here our environment for our API key. If the two of those validate, they can authenticate against this, which is super awesome. So we're going to go through a couple different runs. The first one is just going to be a logging run. So we're going to go ahead and start this. So we are going to go ahead and click our run the cell. Again, this is just showing us our prerequisite. Really, to run LangSmith, you just need your API key, the app ID, and then the project name. And so all of these are default in your Python system, but let's go ahead and run this. And actually, I should show you the whole screen. So basically what this is saying is that we're defining our LangChain key from our environment variable. Also note, I always put this in here. It's a .m file. I just like running or using .m files in my folder instead of using the exports. So we're going to define a run ID. We're going to use requests to actually post to the LangSmith API. We're going to define our run name. This is going to be, and then some just default information. So we have our inputs, and then this is how we authenticate. And then we'll do some work, but we can actually patch our request so that we can see, we'll see foo, and then we'll see bar. So let's go ahead and run this. You can see that we're getting a response 200, and now we can actually go to our projects page and actually see this information here. So let's take a look. If we go to our projects, I have been using this tracing cookbook one, but we're actually going to see it in the default. So we can see right here, we have our first run. It's called foo. And this is our log. We actually have our input is foo and our output is bar. And that comes from the initial part of our post. So we're actually posting to the API. And then for our output, we're actually patching or updating that request. All right, so if again, I just find this really awesome. But so what we're looking at here is the additional values that we can put into our post request. So we can have things like error, we can have some extras, we can even have our session name, and then these events. All of this can be found in the API documentation, which is part of the notebook here, so you can get all of that. So let's keep going and look at another chain. This one's going to be a little more complex, they're saying. So right here, we can already see different things, right? So we have our session name, so it can be more explicit instead of having the default. And then we're actually adding in tags so that we can find this easier. I've seen this in previous videos. But look at this. This is really cool. We can actually add our metadata, including our runtime and our platform, and then any specific keys that we want. So that's really cool that you can actually include the metadata for your run based on this API. So in this round, what we're going to do, again, this is just saying we can do whatever work we would want in this particular spot. And now we're actually going to add events. So we're going to have an event name of retry and an event name of new token. So what will happen is we'll post a new request, we'll define our events, and then we're going to append those events to a new call, which is an update call, and it will be a patch. So we're going to do the same kind of process of a post and then a patch as before. But sorry for jumping all around. But then we're going to include this events array right here. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. And now we're waiting for our request to come back. All right, and so what it's saying is, again, we're looking for these tags. It included metadata, and now we can actually look at our second run as well. So let's go ahead and do that in LangChain. If we go back here, we have our first run. Again, this is in our default projects. If we go back to our projects, we can already see that my REST project is running. So this is what we defined in our session name. Let's go ahead and click that. We have our input of foo. Let's see if we got our patch. So remember, foo is the first part that where we sent, and then our patch was bar. So we can see already that we have our tags here. Those are the parts of the array that we sent as well. And let's take a look at our metadata. Awesome, so we have our key, our my key and my value, and then we also have our runtime for our platform that we've logged inside the metadata for this run. Again, this is really exciting and really cool that this is essentially LangSmith is language agnostic. So next what we're going to do is look at logging LLM runs. So we're still going to be taking our information through the post, but now what we're going to be doing is defining what this LLM is going to be doing. So in this one, we're doing our post, we're including our JSON, and this includes here. So we're going to say our new name is the run chat model, or my chat model run. The run type is an LLM. Our inputs, this is the kind of array that OpenAI would expect. So we're defining our role as a user, and we're asking a question about what's the weather in SF. We have our model. This is an OpenAI function. So what we're doing is we're defining an array of a function that we want to call back to in our code. We'll actually have another follow-up video on this too, but it basically means that we would be calling out to OpenAI, then it would return with a function name and these specific parameters as answers. So it's a way to kind of format your response, but also then call a function after. Again, we would have some work being done here. And now what we're going to do is we are going to patch the information that we expect, which is our choices. We're getting an array. So we have our index of the array. We have our message, which now we know we're an assistant. We have our content, and here is our function call that we could then put as a dynamic function using this name, so as long as this function was in our code. And here are the arguments that we would get back. Our argument is location, and the value is going to be San Francisco, California. So let's run this and see what our next response is. So we got 200. This is telling us to go. You can see now, because we didn't specify a session, we're going to default. So let's go check that out. So we go back to projects. We can also see that default is now at the top. It's the most recent run. Here is our my chat model run. We have our human interaction, which would be the LLM. You can even see right here that the type is an LLM in our trace, which is pretty sweet. And then it's going through the arguments, or not the arguments, it's going through the response of our function call with the name, and then our arguments is location, and our value is San Francisco. All right, so let's keep going through. There's a couple more examples. Next example, which is a logging completions model. And so what this is going to do is, again, we're going to be doing our post. We're going to say that our name is my LLM run. Again, we're doing a run type of LLM, and we're putting in our inputs as a prompt. We don't have an array here because we're following the API for OpenAI, which is a prompt string. Telling it the engine, which is DaVinci 3, our temperature, our start time, and then we would have some work here. And then we're going to patch, again, the response. So in the completion, we would expect choices again. We would have our array. It's going to have the text that we're specifically looking for. And then the reason for stop, or the finish reason is stop. So let's go ahead and run this. And again, we're getting a response of 200. We're going to be looking in our default because we didn't define a session name. So let's do that. So if we go back to default here, we can see that my LLM run is updated. Again, we can see that this is an LLM type. It's saying hi there. And then the completion, my name is Polly and I'm excited to talk to you. All right. So the next one is a nested run. So in the nested run, we need to have a parent run ID, and then we're going to have an execution order. All right, so we're going to be doing something new. We're going to create a run logger, which is a class that's going to be managing our execution state, order state. So what we're doing here is we're putting in our ID, our LangSmith project. Again, this is being defined in my case for the .m file. We are going to have our class of run logger. We're going to have a function that is our execution order. We need to make sure that we have our run ID. And then else it's going to be an execution order of 1, otherwise we're incrementing. Then we can go ahead and update the execution order, and then we're going to post our run. So the post run is literally the request that we've been doing previously, where it initializes the run with a post based on the run ID. So then we're going to say, again, we're going to have a name. We do have a session name, so this is going to go into our project. We have our inputs data, which we're going to pass. And then we have our execution order, which is coming from our logger class, and our parent run ID. And then, of course, our header for our LangSmith API key. Then lastly, we're going to have our patch which is going to look for errors or our output, and then give the end time. So let's go ahead and make sure we run that. So we define our class. Now, in order to run this, what we're going to do is we're going to call our logger, and we're going to define a Fibonacci code as an example. And as we're running this function, we'll see that we're creating a parent run ID here. We're logging based on our logger with a post run on the Fibonacci sequence, right? So you could think of this as right here. This is an example of us doing this in any kind of language, essentially. So we could just define a function. We're defining our run ID. We're logging it through our post to create a new entry into LangSmith. And then here's our logic. So we're saying if n is less than 1, where we have our result as n. Otherwise, we're passing through this Fibonacci into this Fibonacci sequence. And then here is when we're running the patch to actually update. So remember we said that our result, if you can see it actually right here, our outputs. So here's our output for a successful run. And then if we have an exception for an error, we can actually define that as well just by including it as our error that goes to this JSON. So let's define this Fibonacci function, and then let's actually run it. So we're going to say Fibonacci of 5. So it may take a second for that to run. So now it's come back. So that means that both of the logs that we were trying to run have run successfully. And now we can actually go and look at the trace of this Fibonacci. So remember we actually defined a session. So we're going to be looking for my REST project in this instance. All right, so if we go back here and we look at now we're back in LangSmith, we go back to our projects, you can see the my REST project, but you can also see the trace here. So I misspoke. It wouldn't be the my REST project that we previously set, because in our function we actually said grab the LangSmith project. So it's saying if we didn't define this environment variable, which we did, then it would be the my REST project. But since we do have this our LangChain project environment variable, it's actually going to be our in my case the tracing cookbook, which we've been following. So right here you can see the successful Fibonacci sequence. And this is how it's actually chaining all the way through. So you can actually see how it's going through a number and then result, and then continuing down through our sequence until, and then going back. And it gives you all the execution and latency times, which is super cool. All right, so our next example, we're actually going to take this same information, but the last one we did was a success. So remember we had our error that we wanted to test. So as a single request, we're going to run this now and sorry. So now what we're going to do is we're going to run this here and we'll get the error specifically. So we're taking that same function that we wrote previously. We're going to say if it's less than 0, then we have a negative number, and negative numbers are not allowed. And so we're going to try to trace with an error by saying Fibonacci to 0.3. So let's go ahead and run this. We should see an example here. And again, we're going to be looking for our Fibonacci sequence, and let's take a look. All right. And so if we go to LangSmith and we click on our project, we can already see that we have our Fibonacci recursive and we have an input of 2.3. We notice that we have an error. So we can click and we're getting our output print of negative number not allowed, and it's still giving us the trace. So we can actually see the numbers that it was trying, right? So it's not, and then there we go, right here is where our negative number comes from. So that's really cool. It actually logs the error as well. All right, so that's it for us today. We went through a lot. We looked at the capabilities of REST. So we went through the Fibonacci example, both the success and failure. We went through a couple different nested logins or nested logs, and as well as looked at different types of LLMs and defining the sessions to see those in LangSmith. So I hope you're excited about this. I hope you learned a lot. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy nerding.